I didn't run when I first saw the car, and that was my first mistake. It was 2:17 in the morning, the kind of hour when New York feels like it's holding its breath, when even the traffic lights seem slower to change and the city forgets to pretend it's safe. I stepped out of Mercy General Hospital with my jacket half-zipped and my hair still tied back from a 14-hour shift. My feet aching inside worn-out sneakers that had seen too many double shifts and not enough rest. The air smelled like rain and exhaust, a cold mist settling over the pavement as streetlights flickered in tired yellow halos, and across the street, a black SUV sat with its engine running but no headlights on, like it was waiting for something or someone. And for a second I told myself it wasn't me because things like that don't happen to people like me, not nurses who still carried student loan debt and counted every dollar before buying groceries. Not girls who spent their nights saving. Strangers and their mornings trying to stay awake on bad coffee. I adjusted my bag on my shoulder and started walking toward the parking structure, telling myself not to look, not to turn my head, because once you look, you confirm it, and once you confirm it, you can't pretend it's nothing anymore. But then I heard it, footsteps behind me, not hurried, not careless, measured, steady, like whoever it was already knew exactly how fast I would walk and how far I would go. And that's when something inside me shifted, something quiet but certain. The kind of instinct you don't learn in school, the kind that lives in your bones and only wakes up when it matters. I didn't run, not yet. I just walked faster, my breath shallow, my fingers tightening around my bag strap as I crossed into the concrete echo of the parking structure, where the sound of my steps bounced off the walls and came back to me louder than they should have, and the shadows stretched longer between the pillars, swallowing the corners where security cameras didn't quite reach, and I told myself I was imagining things until the footsteps followed me inside. Until they didn't fade. Didn't turn away, didn't hesitate, just kept coming like they belonged there. Like they belonged behind me. I turned the corner too fast, nearly slipping on the damp concrete, and that's when a hand closed around my wrist, firm but not rough, stopping me mid-step, and my heart jumped so hard it felt like it skipped a beat entirely, like my body was trying to decide whether to fight or disappear, and I spun around expecting fear, expecting danger, expecting the worst version of whatever was chasing me. But instead I saw him, a man in a dark coat, standing too close and somehow completely still, like the chaos around us didn't apply to him, his eyes scanning past me first, not even looking at me, tracking something behind me with a focus that made my skin prickle, and only then did his gaze settle on my face, sharp and calm in a way that didn't match the situation at all. He stepped closer, shifting his body just enough to block me from view, and everything about him changed in that movement, not softer, not kinder, just controlled, like he had already calculated every possible outcome and chosen the one he wanted. His voice was low when he spoke, close enough that I could feel it more than hear it, steady and certain like he wasn't guessing, like he already knew what would happen next. "You're in danger," he said, and there was no panic in it, no urgency, just fact, like he was telling me the time or the weather, something inevitable and already decided, and before I could even ask what he meant, before I could pull my hand away or demand an explanation, he added, "Don't look back. Put your hand on my arm, and call me Dad." For a second, everything slowed, the distant hum of the city, the faint drip of water from the ceiling, the echo of footsteps getting closer behind me, and I realized I had exactly one choice to make, not between right and wrong, but between known and unknown, between running toward the danger I understood or trusting the one I didn't, and somehow, without knowing why, I let go of my bag strap and did exactly what he said. I slipped my hand onto his arm like he told me to, and the moment I did, everything about him shifted in a way that made no sense and yet felt completely real, like I had just stepped into a role I did not audition for but somehow already knew the lines to. His posture relaxing just enough to look natural, his shoulders lowering, his presence changing from something sharp and dangerous into something steady and familiar. And when he moved, he did not pull me, he guided me, subtle, controlled, like a parent walking a tired child through a crowded place. And for a second I almost believed it myself, almost forgot the footsteps behind us, almost forgot the cold weight sitting in my chest. The voices reached us before the men did, low and deliberate, speaking in tones that were not loud but carried authority, the kind that did not need to raise volume to be heard, and I felt his arm tighten slightly under my fingers, not in panic, not in fear, just a small adjustment, like he had anticipated this exact moment long before it happened. And then they were there, 3 men stepping into the dim light, their attention landing on me immediately, Not on him, not on the space, just on me, like I was the only thing in the room that mattered, and one of them held up a phone, the screen glowing faintly, a picture on it that I did not need to see to recognize. My face. My breath caught, but the man beside me did not even glance at the screen, did not acknowledge it, did not react in any visible way. He just let out a quiet exhale, the kind that sounded almost tired, almost annoyed, and shifted his stance slightly so that I was half behind him, shielded without being hidden, and when he spoke, his voice was completely different from before, warmer, softer, threaded with a kind of casual authority that made it sound like this was the most ordinary conversation in the world. "She just finished a 14-hour shift," he said, his tone carrying a quiet warning wrapped in politeness. "And I am taking her home." There was a pause, not long, but heavy enough that I could feel it settle into the space between them, and one of the men took a step closer, his eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to piece something together, as if trying to decide whether to challenge what was standing in front of him, and I felt my fingers tighten on the sleeve of the man beside me without meaning to, my body reacting before my mind could catch up, and that was when he did something small but undeniable. He placed his hand over mine, not squeezing, not forcing, just resting there, steady and grounding, like he was reminding me to stay in the role, to breathe, to not break whatever illusion we were holding together. "You should head back," he added, his voice still calm but carrying a subtle edge now, something beneath the surface that did not need to be explained, and for a moment no one moved, no one spoke, and then, slowly, the man with the phone lowered it, his gaze lingering on me for one last second before shifting away, and just like that, they stepped back, not defeated, not convinced, but choosing not to push further, choosing to walk away instead of testing whatever line had just been drawn. I did not breathe until they disappeared around the corner, until the echo of their footsteps faded into nothing, and even then, the man beside me did not relax, did not move away, did not drop the act immediately. He waited, counting something I could not see, measuring time in a way that felt practiced, and only after a few long seconds did his hand fall away from mine. His posture shifting again, the warmth disappearing as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by that same controlled stillness I had seen before. "They will come back," he said quietly, not looking at me, his gaze already scanning the exit, calculating something I did not understand, and then he turned slightly, just enough for me to see the side of his face, sharp lines, unreadable expression, and added, "So we are not done yet." I should have left right then, the moment he said we were not done, the moment I realized whatever had just happened was only a pause and not an ending. But my feet did not move, like some part of me already understood that walking away was no longer a real option, and he did not try to stop me, did not reach for me again, did not repeat himself. He just turned and started walking toward the far end of the parking structure like he expected me to follow, not because he demanded it, but because he knew I would, and that was somehow worse. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended, trailing just a step behind him as the echo of our footsteps filled the empty concrete space. And he did not slow down, did not look back, just said, "Somewhere they will not check first." Like this was a routine he had rehearsed before. Like this was not the first time he had guided someone through a situation they did not understand. The rain outside had picked up, tapping against the entrance in a steady rhythm as we stepped out into the dim glow of streetlights. And that was when I noticed the car, a black sedan parked at the curb like it had been waiting the entire time, engine running, headlights low, and the driver inside did not even glance at me, did not ask a single question, just unlocked the doors the second we approached, like he had been expecting this exact moment down to the second. I stopped short, my instincts catching up all at once, and for the first time since he grabbed my wrist, I pulled back slightly. "I am not getting into a car with someone I do not know," I said, the words coming out sharper now, steadier, because fear had finally found its voice, and he paused, just for a second, enough to acknowledge what I said without actually turning it into a conversation. "Then you can stay here," he replied, his tone even, almost indifferent, like either choice meant nothing to him, but then he added, "And when they come back, they will not ask questions this time." And there was something about the way he said it, not threatening, not dramatic, just certain, that made the air feel heavier, like the future had already been decided and I was the only one still pretending it had not. I looked back over my shoulder, the empty street stretching out under the rain, the quiet too quiet now, like it was waiting for something to break it, and I realized I did not know where safe was anymore, did not know who to trust, Did not even know if trust was still part of the equation. And when I turned back, he was already opening the car door, not rushing me, not forcing me, just holding it there like he had all the time in the world. "You said to call you Dad." I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. A strange mix of disbelief and accusation, and for the first time, something almost like amusement flickered across his expression. Gone so quickly I almost missed it. "That was for them," he said simply, and then after a beat, quieter, "This is for you." I hesitated one last second, feeling the weight of everything pressing in, the hospital behind me, the unknown ahead, the memory of those men and the certainty in his voice, and then I made the only choice that felt like it might keep me alive long enough to understand what was happening. I got into the car. The door closed with a soft, final sound, sealing me inside a world that did not belong to me, and as the sedan pulled away from the curb, smooth and silent, I glanced at him sitting beside me, his gaze fixed forward, unreadable, like none of this had surprised him. Like this had all been part of something I had not seen coming, and that was when it hit me, not all at once, but slowly, like a truth unfolding piece by piece, that whatever danger I had just escaped, I might have just stepped into. Something even deeper, something I did not yet have a name for. And the only thing I knew for certain was that the man sitting next to me was the one leading me there. The car did not drive fast, and that somehow made it worse, because speed would have meant urgency, panic, something out of control. But this was smooth, deliberate, like every turn had already been mapped out long before I stepped inside. The city sliding past the window in quiet blurs of yellow light and rain-streaked glass, and I sat there with my hands in my lap, trying not to look at him but feeling his presence anyway, like the air itself had shifted around him. No one spoke, not him, not the driver, not me, and the silence was not empty, it was full, heavy with things I did not understand, questions I did not know how to ask, answers I was not sure I wanted to hear, and every second that passed made it clearer that this was not a rescue in the way I had imagined. This was something else, something structured, something controlled. We crossed from Lower Manhattan into Tribeca, the streets quieter here, the buildings taller, older, expensive in a way that did not need to announce itself, and finally the car slowed in front of a narrow brownstone that looked almost ordinary from the outside, except for the way the street felt different around it, like people avoided walking too close without knowing why, like the space itself belonged to someone unseen. The car stopped, the engine still running, and the driver stepped out first, opening the door without a word, without looking at me, and the man beside me moved next, not rushing, not checking if I followed, just stepping onto the sidewalk like he knew I would not stay behind. And again, I did not understand why that certainty unsettled me more than anything else. I stepped out into the cool air, the rain lighter now, just a fine mist settling over everything, and for a second I considered walking away, just turning and heading down the block, blending into the city like I had done 1,000 times before. But then I remembered the parking structure, the photo on the phone, the way those men had looked at me like I was already something they owned, and I stayed. He was already at the door, unlocking it with a small, precise motion, and when it opened, the inside was nothing like I expected. No noise, no clutter, no sign of ordinary life, just clean lines, polished floors, soft lighting that made everything look intentional, controlled. And as I stepped inside, I felt it immediately, the shift, like crossing an invisible line into a space where different rules applied. Two men stood further inside, both in dark suits, both alert in a way that did not look like security guards at a hospital or a mall, but something sharper, more aware, and when they saw him, they did not speak, did not question, they just nodded once, subtle, respectful, and stepped aside, like his presence alone was enough to answer whatever questions they might have had. I slowed, my eyes taking in details I did not want to notice, the lack of personal items, the absence of anything that suggested comfort or warmth, no family photos, no signs of someone living a life here, just space, function, and control, and suddenly the exhaustion from my shift came rushing back, mixing with something colder, something sharper, the realization that I was not just in someone's home, I was in his world. "You can go upstairs," he said, his voice breaking the silence without raising it, without needing to, and I turned toward him, expecting instructions, explanations, something more than that, but he was already moving past me, removing his coat, setting it aside with the same measured precision he had used for everything else, like nothing about this moment required urgency or concern. "Third floor," he added, not looking at me, "first door on the left." And that was it. No reassurance, no warning, No attempt to make me feel safe or welcome, just direction. Like I had already agreed to stay. Like this had already been decided somewhere I had not been part of. I stood there for a second longer than I should have, my mind trying to catch up, trying to find something familiar in all of this, something I could hold on to. But there was nothing, just the quiet hum of a place that felt too still, too controlled, too deliberate. And as I finally turned toward the stairs, one thought settled in, clear and unavoidable, that the danger I had run from was simple compared to this, because at least out there, I knew I was being chased. But in here I did not yet know what I had stepped into, or what it would cost me to walk back out. I did not expect the stairs to feel longer than they looked, but each step seemed to stretch the distance between who I was an hour ago and whatever version of me had walked into this place. My hand brushing lightly against the railing as I climbed to the third floor, the quiet pressing in around me in a way that made every small sound feel louder than it should have been, my breathing, my footsteps, even the faint hum of something electrical behind the walls. And when I reached the landing, I paused, not because I was tired, but because something in me was hesitating, like crossing that final few feet would make everything real in a way I could not undo. The hallway was narrow but clean, the lighting soft and evenly spaced, no shadows deep enough to hide anything, and yet it still felt like I was walking through something unseen, something that watched, without being visible. And I found the first door on the left exactly where he said it would be, my fingers hovering over the handle for a second before I finally pushed it open. The room inside was simple, almost too simple. A neatly made bed, a dresser, a chair by the window, everything arranged with a kind of precision that felt intentional, like nothing existed here by accident. And I stepped inside slowly, half expecting something to shift, to change, to reveal itself as something else. But it did not. It stayed exactly what it appeared to be, quiet, controlled, waiting. I closed the door behind me, the soft click echoing more than it should have, and for the first time since the parking structure, I was alone, truly alone, and instead of relief, something else settled in, something heavier, because being alone meant I no longer had the distraction of movement or decisions. It meant I had time to think, and thinking was starting to feel dangerous. I moved toward the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to see the street below. The city still awake in its own quiet way, headlights passing, distant figures moving under umbrellas, life continuing like nothing had changed. Like I had not just stepped into something that felt completely separate from all of it, and I realized how strange that was, how easily the world outside kept moving while mine had stopped somewhere between a hospital exit and a stranger's voice telling me to pretend he was my father. My reflection caught faintly in the glass, tired eyes, damp hair, a face that still looked like mine but felt like it belonged to someone who had made a decision she did not fully understand, and I stepped back, letting the curtain fall into place again. Sleep should have come easily after a shift like that, after everything that had happened, but when I sat on the edge of the bed, my body felt alert in a way that had nothing to do with caffeine or adrenaline. It was something deeper, something that refused to let me relax, like my instincts were still trying to piece together a pattern they had not fully recognized yet. I lay back anyway, staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds as they passed, listening to the silence that was not really silent, and that was when I noticed it, small details that did not belong in a normal home, the faint sound of movement somewhere below, measured, deliberate, not casual, the kind of movement that suggested purpose, coordination, people who knew exactly where they needed to be and why, and it made something click in my mind, not fully, not clearly, but enough to shift the way I saw everything around me. This was not just a place where someone lived, this was a place that functioned, that operated, that existed for reasons beyond comfort or routine, and the man downstairs, the one who had stepped between me and whatever was chasing me, he did not just belong here, he defined it. I turned onto my side, pulling the thin blanket over myself more out of habit than comfort, and tried to close my eyes, but the image of him kept returning, the way he had spoken, the way people had stepped back without argument, the way he had not needed to explain anything for things to happen exactly as he intended, and slowly, quietly, a thought formed that I did not want to admit, that the safety I felt in that moment was not because I had escaped danger. It was because I had been placed somewhere else entirely, somewhere controlled by someone who did not need to prove anything to anyone. And as that realization settled in, I understood something else just as clearly, that whatever answers I was looking for, they were not upstairs in this quiet room, they were downstairs with him, and the longer I stayed here without asking, the deeper I was already becoming part of something I did not yet understand. I did not sleep, not really, because every time my eyes closed, my mind kept replaying the same moment over and over again. The way those men had looked at me, the way he had stepped in front of me like it was nothing, like he had done it before, like he knew exactly how it would end, and by the time the sky outside shifted from black to that faint gray that comes just before sunrise, I was already sitting up, my back against the headboard, staring at a room that felt less like a place to rest, and more like a place to wait. Waiting for what, I was not sure, but the feeling would not leave, that quiet pressure under my skin that told me something had already been set in motion long before I arrived here. I stood up slowly, my body stiff from tension rather than sleep, and walked toward the door, opening it just enough to look into the hallway, still empty, still quiet, the same controlled stillness that had greeted me the night before, and for a second I considered going back inside, pretending I could ignore everything until it made sense on its own. But that was not who I was, not really, because I had always been the kind of person who asked questions even when the answers were uncomfortable, especially when they were uncomfortable. The stairs creaked slightly under my weight as I made my way down. The sound small but noticeable in a house that seemed designed to minimize noise, and when I reached the main floor, I saw him immediately, standing near a large table by the window, already dressed, already awake, like sleep was something optional to him, something he did not need in the same way other people did. He did not look surprised to see me, did not turn sharply or question why I was there. He just glanced up briefly, his expression unreadable, and then returned his attention to whatever was in front of him. A set of papers spread out in neat lines, each one placed with intention. "You should have slept," he said, his voice calm, almost casual, like we were discussing something ordinary, something expected, and I stepped closer, stopping just far enough away to feel like I still had space to leave if I needed it. "I tried," I answered, and even to my own ears, my voice sounded different, steadier, sharper, like something inside me had shifted overnight, like fear had been replaced by something else, something closer to clarity. He nodded once, as if that confirmed something for him, and for a moment neither of us spoke, the silence stretching just long enough to feel deliberate, like he was giving me space to decide what I wanted to say next. My eyes drifted to the table, to the papers he had been looking at, and that was when I saw it, not clearly at first, just a shape, a familiar outline, and then my focus sharpened, my breath catching slightly as the image resolved into something unmistakable. A photograph of me, not from last night, not from the parking structure, but from somewhere else, somewhere earlier, and my mind scrambled to place it, to understand when it had been taken, why it existed, and before I could stop myself, I stepped closer, my hand reaching out instinctively, not to take it, just to see it better. There were more beside it, different angles, different moments, all of them me, walking out of the hospital, standing at a crosswalk, sitting on a bench with a coffee cup in my hand, ordinary moments that suddenly did not feel ordinary at all, and the room seemed to tilt slightly as the realization settled in, slow and heavy, that this was not about last night, not just about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. This was something else entirely. "You knew who I was," I said, the words coming out quieter than I expected. Not accusatory. Not yet, just stating what was already obvious. And this time he did look at me fully, his gaze steady, direct, without hesitation or denial. "Yes," he said, and there was no attempt to soften it. No explanation offered alongside it, just the truth placed between us like something solid and unmovable. My pulse quickened, my thoughts racing to catch up, to connect the pieces that were suddenly rearranging themselves into something I did not like, something I did not want to understand. "For how long?" I asked, and he did not answer immediately, his eyes holding mine for a moment longer before shifting slightly, like he was considering not whether to tell me, but how much. "Long enough," he said finally, and something in the way he said it, not defensive, not proud, just certain, made the air feel thinner, harder to breathe, because it meant this had never been random, never been chance, and the man who had told me to pretend he was my father in a parking structure had not just stepped into my life for the first time that night. He had been there long before I ever noticed him, watching, waiting, deciding something I was only just beginning to understand. The word long enough did not answer anything, but somehow it answered everything at the same time, because it meant there was no clean beginning to this, no moment I could point to and say, "This is where it started, this is where I made the wrong choice," and I felt something inside me shift again. Not fear this time, not confusion, but something sharper, something that demanded clarity whether I was ready for it or not. Why? I asked, the question simple but heavy, and for the first time since I met him, I did not lower my voice, did not hesitate, because if he had been watching me, if he had already decided something about me before I even knew he existed, then I deserved at least that much. He studied me for a moment, not in a way that felt invasive, but in a way that felt deliberate, like he was measuring something, not my fear, not my reaction, but my willingness to stand there and ask the question instead of backing away from it. Because you were there? He said finally, and I frowned slightly, the answer too vague, too controlled, like he was giving me only the edge of something much larger. At the hospital, he added, and that was enough to pull something from my memory, not clearly at first, just a fragment, a late night, a patient brought in under circumstances that did not quite add up, the kind of case that everyone notices but no one talks about directly. I felt my chest tighten as the pieces began to align, slowly, unwillingly, and I took a step closer to the table without realizing it, my eyes flicking back to the photographs, to the timeline that now felt less like observation and more like intention. The man I treated, I said, my voice quieter now, not because I was unsure, but because I was starting to understand, and understanding carried its own weight. He nodded once, not surprised that I had connected it, not impressed either, just acknowledging that I had reached the conclusion he expected. He mattered, he said, and again, the simplicity of it made it heavier, because it meant everything else that came with that statement without needing to be explained. I shook my head slightly, more to clear my thoughts than to disagree, because if that was true, if that one moment in the hospital had set all of this in motion, then nothing about last night had been coincidence. So they were not just looking for someone, I said, the realization forming fully. Now, they were looking for me. The words hung there between us, solid and undeniable, and he did not correct me, did not soften it, he just met my gaze and said, yes, in the same steady tone he had used for everything else, like truth did not need decoration. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding, my mind racing ahead, trying to understand the scope of what that meant, how far this went, how many people were involved, and more importantly, where that left me now. And you? I continued, my voice tightening slightly despite myself. You stepped in because of that. And this time there was a pause, not long, but enough to feel intentional, like this answer mattered more than the others. I stepped in, he said slowly, because letting them find you first would have ended things in a way I did not want. And something about that phrasing caught my attention immediately, not want, not could not should not, but did not want, like this was not about right or wrong, not about saving or rescuing, but about choice. My stomach tightened at that, at the realization that whatever protection I had felt, whatever safety I had assumed, it was not given freely, it was chosen, calculated, and that meant it could be taken away just as easily. So what happens now? I asked, and this time there was no hesitation at all, because this was the question that mattered, the one that determined whether I was still just passing through his world or already part of it. He leaned back slightly, his expression unchanged, his voice calm as ever, and said, now you stay where they cannot reach you. And for a brief second, that sounded almost reassuring, almost like the simplest solution, until he added, and you learn why they were looking in the first place. And the weight of that settled in immediately, because it meant this was not over, not even close. It meant there were answers I had not uncovered yet, truths I had not faced yet, and most importantly, it meant the man standing in front of me was not just the one who had interrupted my life. He was the one now guiding what came next, whether I was ready for it or not. I thought staying would feel like being trapped, but it did not in the way I expected, because nothing about this place forced me to remain, no locked doors, no commands, no visible restraints, and somehow that made it harder to leave, because every choice still felt like mine even when I knew it was not. The first day passed quietly, almost too quietly, like the world outside had been turned down to a low hum while everything inside sharpened instead. And by the second day I noticed the pattern, not immediately, not all at once, but in small details that began to connect whether I wanted them to or not. The same car parked across the street when I looked out the window in the morning, not moving, not drawing attention, just there, and when I stepped outside for the first time since arriving, telling myself I needed air, needed to prove to myself that I could still walk away if I wanted to. It was still there, engine off now, but occupied. I could feel it even without seeing clearly through the tinted glass. I walked anyway, down the block, past a coffee shop that looked normal enough, people inside with laptops and paper cups, conversations blending into background noise, and for a moment I almost convinced myself that I had imagined everything. That this was still my city, still my life, just slightly shifted. But then I noticed him, a man sitting near the window, reading a newspaper he never turned the page of, his eyes lifting just slightly when I passed, not enough to be obvious, but enough for me to feel it, and when I reached the corner and glanced back, he was no longer looking at the paper at all. I kept walking, my pulse steady but my awareness sharper now, every reflection in every storefront catching my attention, every movement registering whether I wanted it to or not, and the realization settled in slowly, not with fear, but with certainty, that I was not alone out here, not even for a second. When I returned to the brownstone, the car was gone, the street looked exactly as it should have, empty in the way that feels normal, and for a brief moment I questioned myself, wondered if I had read too much into things. But the second I stepped inside, he was there, exactly where I had left him. Earlier, like time moved differently for him, like he existed on a schedule I could not see. "You went out," he said, not as a question, not as an accusation, just an observation. And I stopped a few steps inside the door, meeting his gaze directly. "You already knew that?" I replied. And there was a pause, not tense, not uncomfortable, just acknowledging something that no longer needed to be hidden. "Yes," he said, simply, and for a second, something close to frustration flickered through me. Not because he was watching, but because he did not feel the need to deny it. "You have people following me," I said, the words landing between us with more weight than I expected, and he tilted his head slightly, considering that phrasing. "No," he corrected calmly. "I have people making sure nothing happens to you." And the difference between those two statements hung there, subtle but significant, and I realized that from his perspective, this was not control, this was protection, even if it did not feel that way to me. "You did not ask me if I wanted that," I said, my voice tightening just enough to show that I meant it. And for the first time he stepped closer, not invading my space, but reducing the distance just enough to make his presence more immediate. "If I had asked," he said quietly, "you would have said no." And I opened my mouth to respond, to argue, to tell him he did not get to make that decision for me. But the truth of it stopped me before I could say anything, because he was right. I would have said no, and we both knew it. "And you would be less safe because of it?" he added, not harsh, not dismissive, just stating a fact the same way he had stated everything else. And that was the part that unsettled me the most, not the control, not the surveillance, but the certainty, the way he spoke like outcomes were predictable, like choices had consequences he had already calculated before I even considered them. I looked at him for a long moment, trying to find something human in that, something uncertain, something that did not feel so absolute, and for a second, just a second, I thought I saw it, something quieter behind the control, something that did not quite belong to the version of him I had seen so far, and then it was gone, replaced by that same steady composure. "You are not a prisoner here," he said finally, and I believed him, because nothing around me suggested otherwise, but then he added, "But you are not invisible anymore either." And that settled deeper than anything else he had said, because it meant that whatever I had been before, whatever life I thought I could return to, it no longer existed in the same way, and whether I stayed or left, something had already changed permanently, and he was the one who had made sure of it. The truth does not arrive all at once, it settles in slowly, like something you notice out of the corner of your eye and then cannot unsee no matter how hard you try. And for me, it started that night when I could not sleep again, not because of fear this time, but because my mind kept circling the same question, not why they were looking for me, not why he had been watching me, but what exactly I had done to become part of something this deliberate. I lay there for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying every shift I had worked over the past few months, every unusual case, every patient that did not quite fit, and at first nothing stood out, just the normal chaos of an emergency room in New York City, until one memory refused to stay buried, one moment that felt different the second it surfaced. It had been late, close to midnight, the kind of hour when the waiting room thins out but the cases get stranger, and a man had been brought in, not by ambulance, not through the usual channels, but by two individuals who stayed just long enough to make sure he was admitted before disappearing without paperwork, without questions, and I remembered noticing it, the way his condition did not match the explanation given, the way the room felt slightly more tense than usual, like everyone understood something without saying it out loud. I had treated him anyway, because that was my job, because I had taken an oath that did not change based on circumstances, and I remembered his eyes more than anything, alert despite everything, watching me like he was trying to decide something, like he was measuring whether I would ask questions or just do what needed to be done. I had not asked, not because I did not notice, but because I chose not to, and at the time it felt like the right decision, the professional one, the safe one, but now, standing in that quiet house, days later, it felt like the exact moment everything had shifted without me realizing it. I sat up slowly, the realization settling in piece by piece, my pulse steady but my thoughts sharp, and I did not wait this time. I did not stay upstairs trying to convince myself it would make sense on its own. I went down, each step more certain than the last, because I already knew what I was going to ask before I even saw him. He was in the same place again, like he had not moved, like time adjusted itself around him instead of the other way around, and when I stepped into the room, he looked up immediately, not surprised, not caught off guard, just acknowledging that I had arrived at something he had been expecting. "The patient," I said without preamble, my voice steady, controlled, because I was not guessing anymore. "The one from the hospital, he was connected to you." And there was no denial, no attempt to redirect, just a single nod that confirmed everything in a way words did not need to. "Yes," he said, and the simplicity of it made it heavier than any explanation could have. I took another step forward, my focus narrowing now, not on fear, not on uncertainty, but on understanding the full scope of what that meant. And because I treated him, I continued. Because I saw him, I became part of something I was never supposed to see. And again, he did not correct me, did not soften it, just let the truth stand exactly as it was. "You became visible," he said, and that word landed differently than I expected. Not targeted, not chosen, but exposed, like I had stepped into a light I did not know existed. I felt my breath slow, my thoughts aligning into something clearer, something more defined, and for the first time since all of this began, I understood the full weight of it, not just that I had been in danger, but why. So they were not looking for me because of something I did. "Wrong," I said, my voice quieter now, more certain. "They were looking for me because I saw something I was not supposed to see." And his gaze held mine for a moment longer before he said, "Yes," one final time, sealing it in a way that left no room for doubt. And that was the moment everything changed. Not because I was more afraid, but because I finally understood that this was never random, never an accident, it was a consequence, and the man standing in front of me was not just the one who had pulled me out of it, he was the one who had been part of it from the very beginning. Understanding something does not mean you accept it, and that was the part one felt settling in next, not fear, not confusion, but resistance, sharp and undeniable, because knowing why I had been pulled into this did not make it right, did not make it something I was willing to just stand inside without pushing back. "So this is because of you?" I said, not raising my voice, not stepping away, just letting the words land exactly where they belonged, and for the first time since we started this conversation, there was a shift, not in his posture, not in his tone, but in the space between us, something tightening, something more direct. He did not answer immediately, and that silence felt different from the others, heavier, more deliberate, like this was the part where truth carried weight beyond simple acknowledgement. "Yes," he said finally, his voice steady, unchanged, and that single word did more than any explanation could have, because it removed every layer of distance, every illusion that this had been something outside of him. I let out a slow breath, my thoughts moving faster now, connecting everything in a way that felt both clear and impossible at the same time, because if he was part of the reason I had been seen, part of the reason I had been followed, then everything else shifted with that understanding. "You caused this?" I said, not as an accusation, not as a question, just stating it the way he had stated everything else, and he met my gaze without hesitation, without defense, without trying to soften it. "Yes," he repeated, and there was no apology in it, no regret, just truth, and that was the part that hit the hardest, not what he had done, but the way he stood in it so completely. I felt something tighten in my chest, not fear, not anger exactly, but something close to both, something that made it harder to stay still, harder to keep my voice as controlled as it had been. "Then why step in at all?" I asked, because that was the part that did not make sense, the part that refused to fit into the rest of the pattern. "If this started because of you, why not just let it end that way?" And for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something shift in his expression, something quieter, something less certain, but it was gone before I could hold on to it. He stepped closer then, not enough to crowd me, but enough to make the distance between us feel intentional, like this answer mattered more than the others. Because I do not let outcomes I can control be decided by someone else, he said, and the words were calm, measured, but there was something underneath them, something that felt less like strategy and more like choice, and that was when it clicked, not fully, not completely, but enough to change the way I saw him standing there. So this is not about me, I said slowly, my voice quieter now, more focused. This is about control. And he did not deny it, did not argue, just held my gaze and said, it is about making sure something does not happen when I have the ability to prevent it. And the distinction was subtle, but it mattered because it meant that in his mind, this was not about power for the sake of power, it was about outcome, about decision, about choosing which direction things moved in. I looked at him for a long moment, trying to reconcile that with everything else, trying to understand how someone could be both the cause and the interruption of the same situation, how he could stand there and admit both without contradiction, and slowly, quietly, something else settled in, something I did not expect, that this was not chaos to him, not even conflict, it was structure, a system where every action had a response, every choice had a consequence, and he simply moved within it, with a certainty I had never experienced before. You said I was visible? I said after a moment, bringing the conversation back to the part that still mattered most. So what does that make me now? And this time he did not answer immediately, his gaze shifting slightly, not away from me, but deeper, like he was considering something beyond the question itself. Now, he said finally, his voice just as steady as before, you are someone they will keep looking for. And the words settled in with a weight that felt final because it meant there was no returning to what I had been, no stepping back into a life where this did not exist. And as that realization took hold, I understood something else just as clearly, that whatever came next, whatever this became, it would not be something I could walk away from without consequence, because the moment I became visible, I also became part of a world that did not forget. Night does not fall the same way when you know someone is looking for you. It feels heavier, like the air carries intention, like every shadow has a direction, and that evening, the house did not feel quiet anymore. It felt prepared. I noticed it in the smallest ways at first, the way the men inside moved more frequently, not rushed, not chaotic, but purposeful, like pieces on a board shifting into place before something began, and I found myself standing near the window again, watching the street below, trying to see what had changed even though nothing obvious had. They are closer tonight, he said from behind me, his voice calm as ever, and I did not turn immediately, not because I was ignoring him, but because I already knew he was right. I could feel it in the way the city sounded, in the way the silence between passing cars stretched just a little too long. How do you know? I asked, finally glancing back, and he was already moving, not toward me, but toward the front of the house, his attention fixed on something beyond the walls. Because they are not waiting anymore, he replied, and there was something in that answer that made my pulse steady instead of spike, like my body had already accepted that whatever came next was not something I could stop, only something I would move through. The shift happened quickly after that, not loud, not chaotic, just a change in rhythm, doors closing more firmly, footsteps aligning, voices low and controlled, and I realized that whatever this world was, it did not react, it anticipated. Stay here, he said as he passed me, not looking back, not checking if I would listen, just stating it like it was already understood, and for a second I almost stayed exactly where I was, because it would have been easier, safer, simpler, but something in me refused, something that had been building since the moment I saw those photographs, since the moment I realized this was never random, and I followed instead, not closely, not recklessly, just enough to see without being in the way. The front room looked the same as it had earlier, clean, controlled, nothing out of place, but the energy inside it had shifted completely, the men positioned with quiet precision, their focus directed outward, toward the street, toward something I still could not see, and he stood at the center of it without raising his voice, without giving orders that needed to be repeated, just a few quiet instructions that moved everything into place as if they had already been decided before he spoke them. I watched him then, really watched him, not as the man who had stepped between me and danger in a parking structure, not as the one who had been watching me from a distance, but as something else entirely, someone who did not just exist in this world but shaped it, controlled the way it moved, the way it responded, the way it held together under pressure, and for the first time I understood what that kind of presence meant, not loud, not aggressive, just absolute. A sound from outside drew my attention back to the street, not dramatic, not obvious, just enough to signal that whatever had been approaching was now here, and I felt it again, that shift in the air, that quiet certainty that something was unfolding exactly the way it had been expected to. "Lily," he said, and this time he did look at me, directly, his gaze steady in a way that felt different from before, not assessing, not measuring, just clear, "Stay behind me." And there was no pretense in it now, no performance, no need to call him anything he was not, just a statement that carried more weight than anything else he had said so far. I did not argue, did not question it, because in that moment, I understood something that had taken me too long to see, that whatever this was, whatever I had been pulled into, he was not just part of it. He was the reason it had not already ended differently. And as I stepped back slightly, positioning myself where he had indicated, I realized that for the first time since all of this began, I was not trying to figure out how to leave, I was trying to understand how to survive inside it, and the only person who seemed to know that answer was the man standing in front of me. The moment stretched longer than it should have, not because anything visible was happening, but because everything invisible already had, the kind of tension that does not come from noise but from certainty, like a decision has been made somewhere you cannot see and you are just waiting for it to reach you. I stayed where he told me, a step behind, close enough to feel the steadiness of his presence without touching it. And for the first time I understood that this was not about reacting anymore. This was about timing, about knowing exactly when to move and when to hold still, and he seemed to exist entirely inside that awareness. The men around him did not speak much, did not need to, their positions shifting slightly as if guided by something unspoken, and I realized that whatever structure held this place together, it was not built on loud commands or visible force, it was built on understanding, on expectation, on knowing what would happen before it happened. A car slowed outside, not stopping immediately, just passing once, then again, slower the second time, and I felt it in my chest before I consciously registered it. That this was not random traffic, this was something circling, something confirming, and he did not even look at the window to know it. "It is them?" I said quietly, more to myself than to him, and he gave the smallest nod, not surprised, not tense, just acknowledging what had already been clear to him long before it reached me. The front door did not open suddenly, nothing dramatic broke the moment, but the shift came anyway, subtle, precise, like a line being crossed without sound, and I felt my breath steady instead of quicken, my thoughts narrowing instead of scattering, because at some point between the hospital and this room, I had stopped waiting for things to make sense and started accepting that they already did, just not in the way I was used to. "They think you are still outside their reach," he said, his voice low, measured, and I glanced at him, trying to understand what that meant, but before I could ask, he added, "That is why they came closer." And there was something in that explanation that shifted everything again, because it meant this was not just about being found, it was about being misjudged. Another moment passed, and then another, and I realized that nothing about this felt rushed, nothing about it felt out of control. It felt like something unfolding exactly as it had been expected to, and that realization was more unsettling than any sudden movement could have been, because it meant that whatever was happening outside these walls, he had already accounted for it. A quiet exchange between two of the men near the entrance caught my attention. Not the words themselves, but the tone, calm, efficient, confirming something rather than reacting to it. And I understood then that whatever line had just been crossed, it had not caught them off guard. It had simply moved the situation forward. "You knew this would happen?" I said, my voice steady now, no accusation left in it, just recognition, and this time when he looked at me, there was no distance in it, no calculation, just a direct acknowledgement. "Yes," he said, and there was no hesitation, no attempt to soften it, just the same certainty he had carried from the beginning. I exhaled slowly, letting that settle, because it meant that nothing about this moment was unexpected to him. Not the timing, not the approach, not even my presence standing behind him, and that realization shifted something inside me again. Not toward fear, not toward trust, but toward understanding. "Then why let it get this far?" I asked, because if he knew, if he could anticipate this, then this moment was not something he had prevented. It was something he had allowed, and that distinction mattered. He held my gaze for a moment, longer than before, like this answer required more than the others, and then he said, "Because sometimes they need to believe they are close enough to act." And the weight of that settled in immediately, because it meant this was not just defense, it was strategy, it was positioning, it was control not just over what happened, but over what others believed was happening. I looked past him then, toward the door, toward the unseen presence just beyond it, and for the first time I did not feel like I was waiting for something unknown. I felt like I was standing inside something that had already been decided, already been shaped, and the only thing left was to see how it would end. And in that moment I understood something that changed everything, that the man in front of me was not just protecting me from what was outside, he was controlling the way it reached us, the way it unfolded, the way it would eventually stop, and whatever came next, it would not be by chance. It would be because he had chosen it to be that way. It did not end with a sound or a sudden shift or anything that would have made sense in the way I used to understand endings. It ended the way everything else in his world seemed to happen, quietly, precisely, like a door closing somewhere you cannot see but can still feel. The tension that had been building did not break, it dissolved, slowly, almost imperceptibly, and the air in the room changed in a way that was subtle but undeniable, the kind of change you only notice when something that was there before is no longer present. I did not move at first, not because I was frozen, but because I was waiting not for danger this time, but for confirmation, for the moment when I could say to myself that whatever had been approaching had reached its limit and gone no further. One of the men near the entrance gave a small nod, not to me, not to anyone in particular, just a signal that something had shifted, and that was enough for him to relax in a way that was almost invisible, a slight change in posture, a release of something held just beneath the surface. "It is done," he said, and the words were simple, but they carried weight. Not relief, not triumph, just completion, like a process, reaching its natural end. I exhaled slowly, not realizing until that moment how tightly I had been holding everything inside, and for the first time since all of this began, the quiet did not feel like anticipation. It felt like space, like something had been cleared away, even if I did not fully understand how or why. The men around us began to move again, not hurried, not tense, just returning to whatever positions they had held before, like the structure that had shifted was settling back into place, and I watched it all with a kind of clarity I had not felt before, because now I could see it for what it was, not chaos, not randomness, but a system, one that operated on rules I had not known existed until I stepped into it. I turned toward him then, really looking at him, not as the man who had intercepted a moment in a parking structure, not as the one who had been watching me from a distance, but as someone who had just guided something to its conclusion without raising his voice, without losing control, without ever appearing uncertain. "Why me?" I asked, and the question felt different now, not desperate, not confused, but grounded, because I already understood part of the answer. I just needed to hear the rest of it from him. He did not respond immediately, his gaze steady, thoughtful in a way I had not seen before. Like this was not a question he could answer with a single word or a simple truth. "Because you saw something and chose not to look away," he said finally, and I felt that settle somewhere deeper than the rest, because it was not about the situation, not about the danger, it was about a choice I had made without realizing it mattered. I shook my head slightly, not disagreeing, just needing more than that. "That is not enough," I said, and this time, something shifted in his expression again. Not guarded, not distant, just honest in a way that felt unfamiliar coming from him. "No," he agreed quietly, and then after a brief pause, he added, "It is not." And for a moment, the silence between us stretched, not uncomfortable, just full, like something important was about to be said. "You treated someone you did not understand," he continued, his voice lower now, less controlled, more personal, "and you did not change how you saw him because of it." And I felt my breath catch slightly, not from fear, but from recognition, because that had been true. I had not asked questions, I had not judged. I had simply done what I was trained to do. "That does not happen often," he said, and there was something in the way he said it that made it clear he was not speaking generally. He was speaking from experience, from something lived rather than observed. I looked at him for a long moment, trying to understand what that meant coming from someone like him. Someone who existed in a world where people were not seen in simple terms, and slowly something else became clear, something I had not expected to find. "So you chose me?" I said, the words quieter now, more certain, and he did not deny it, did not deflect, he just met my gaze and said, "Yes," with the same certainty he had carried through everything else. The weight of that settled in, not heavy in the way fear had been, but steady, grounding, like a truth that would not shift no matter how I looked at it. And for the first time since all of this began, I understood that this was not just something that had happened to me. It was something that had been decided, shaped, guided, and I was no longer standing outside of it trying to escape. I was inside it, understanding it, choosing how to stand within it. The city outside continued as it always did, distant and unaware, but inside that room, Something had changed in a way I could not undo, and as I looked at him, I realized that whatever came next, whatever this became, it would not be defined by the moment I was pulled into his world. It would be defined by what I chose to do now that I understood it, and for the first time that choice felt like mine.